to this beautiful series of workshops that Kirsten has been working to bring to us tonight. As the second talk or discussion, she will bring us Joanna Jung and Gratitude. And we pass the word to Kirsten, please.
Thank you, Leo. Good evening, everyone. Does everybody have a clipboard and a mirror and a pen? All right. Now we'll begin the essay time. No, I'm just kidding. Joanna Jung and Gratitude. Why are we bringing the image of a butterfly? It's the best human, tangible example that reflects what we wish to discuss throughout these series of workshops. If any of you have ever had the opportunity to actually see this, whether you were in a sixth grade science class like we were, witnessing monarch butterflies from the time they are caterpillars to when they build their chrysalis and out pops a monarch butterfly. But upon the first time you look at a caterpillar, it looks nothing like the butterfly that it will become. Now we know perhaps for some of us that might seem so mundane to make that statement, but we utilize this in comparison to our evolutionary process. But before we get into all of this, the ins and outs, the psychology of Joanna de Angelis, combined with Carl Gustav Jung, the Swedish well-known psychiatrist, Swiss psychiatrist. Before we get into all that and to gratitude again, first of all, we wanted to make a disclaimer that these series of talks, some might think to themselves, well, how much can you really continuously talk about gratitude? There's a whole book written about it. There are actually a slew, hundreds of books written about gratitude. We could spend years on end talking about the psychology of gratitude. Joanna does an excellent job in this book. The title is very deceiving because some people might think, oh, the book is just about gratitude. I know I should be grateful for life, for myself, for my family. What else can she tell me? The book in and of itself is a book. It's a book really to be studied. It's not a book to be read at night and before you go to bed. It is a book to make an appointment with yourself and with God and with your guardian angel a few days a week and to study it as if you were in college studying one of your textbooks. That's the term I was looking for. It's a textbook. In my personal opinion, it's a Spiritist textbook. It is so rich because she dives into the ins and outs of modern day psychology. So it's another disclaimer. We're going to be bringing again some terms that you don't hear every day. We're going to bring some terms that exist in the book so we're all not lost when we say things like archetypes and shadows and the collective unconscious and the personal unconscious. But before I even do that, I actually need 4 volunteers. No, everybody don't jump at once. Don't jump at once. I need 4 volunteers or I'm going to pick you. And okay, Joni, thank you for volunteering yourself. Could you come out to the front of the room? Joni, Aloisio, Roger? Yes. And Shayla, why not? Oh. Okay, so I'm going to place you in positions. And the reason why I'm utilizing this is because I like to throw around different dynamics. Dione, I'm going to ask you to stand with Roger and Shayla. And Aloise, I'm going to have you be over here. Well, not quite. I'm going to ask you all to kind of stand together, close. Okay. And Louise, I'm going to have you come here because the cameraman might dislike me in a minute and start yelling at me. And turn this way. Okay. So in my poor attempt to explain consciousness, psyche, past lives, shadows, and all of which we will cover in this series of workshops, I wanted us to have a more tangible understanding of how past lives, the archetype of the shadow, and how all that plays into this and how complex we are as beings. That's why we say that this book is meant to be a textbook. Okay. Gather together, coagulate together, come together, all 3. Okay. Now, here is Aloiso. Okay. He is Aloiso in this life. He is an artist. He is a father. He is various different things. But did we know that Aloiso in years past, in incarnations past, he was Roger. Roger, who is the this and the that and the also still wearing glasses in both lives. He brings that with him, that unconscious memory there. But he also was Shayla in many incarnations past. Hey, Shayla, hey, girl. And then he also was Dione in many incarnations past. But today, in his conscious mind, he is Aloyso. It's not possible for him to still be all of these other personalities. If it were, he might be schizophrenic. He might be disassociated from the rest of the world. Ergo, that's why the ego, as a sidebar, is very important in this process of our understanding of psychology, because the ego is the doorman, if you will. He doesn't allow Roger to come through and all the other past life memories, otherwise it'd be very overwhelming for Aloyso, as for the rest of us. Thank you all for your participation. You may sit down. That's all for right now. I might call you back again. We share this to bring a point to see how complex we truly are. We bring this also so when we today in the weeks, in the past couple of days, we've seen on TV, I didn't want to mention specifically, but some things that are not pleasant that have been occurring in our world, things that have been not positive. And so we can look at these beings that are committing such heinous crimes, and we judge them and we say it's horrible, and indeed it is horrible what they're doing. But if we look at them as we looked at Aloyso, as a baggage that we have no idea, Aloyso doesn't consciously remember all those things of that which he is. We're going to talk very little about this because we talked about it previously, but something called the personal unconsciousness, where Aloyso will bring with him those tendencies. For instance, in a previous incarnation when he was Roger, he learned how to work with his hands. He learned carpentry and things of all that which encompasses carpentry. Does Aloyso remember him being Roger? No, it's highly probable that he does not. But there in his archives and his unconscious mind, he has the tendency towards carpentry. So here he is in this lifetime. He feels this attraction, if you will, towards working with his hands. All we need to do is look at our tendencies, our likes and dislikes, and we already can tell, at least in a close past, what we were. Because all of that which we do gets archived. Everything. And something else we'll talk about as well. Everything that happens within the world, within humanity, also gets archived. This is an interesting thought because when we look at certain groups in society, and we're going to bring something from Joanna, she talks about this, and we wonder and we think, oh, this group of people, they always act this way. Why is that? Is it just cultural, the idea of nature versus nurture? Well, they just learn to be that way. Is it? Over successive reincarnations? Is it? We're going to bring a text about that a little bit later today. It's something for us to think about when we think about people that are committing heinous crimes, why certain nations continue to hate each other, and how Spiritism helps us to understand. It brings light. But thus we are like this caterpillar in a very simplistic way. We have no notion of what we can be. But in the interim, around here, Joanna says that comes a conflict when we no longer wish to be here, but we wish to be here. But our old selves are pushing us back, but our mind is set forward. Therein lies a lot of conflicts. But we wanted to bring to mind today, because it is a terminology we're going to be using today throughout these series of talks. What is an archetype? It comes from the Greek word archetypon. It's something modeled first as a model. Arche meaning primitive, and tupos meaning a model. So there are a lot of different archetypes. We've already discussed these, but again, I just want to bring it for those who weren't here, who are not familiar. Carl Gustav Jung, whom we've already discussed before, he was a Swiss psychiatrist. And we already explained his whole story, which is very interesting. You guys can Google it or go to our first initial talk. But he was one of the first ones to come with this idea of Archetypes. I just want to see if this works. Okay. And here it is, and I'll bring all of the ones, just some main ones we're going to be discussing. And here's the thing, though. We don't know exactly where these things are. For instance, we have the persona archetype, the ego, the shadow, the anima and animus, and the self. Because people might think, well, where is my ego? Is it like here? Is it like over here? Is it in me? Is it up? So let's not get too lost in terms of where it is, but that it does indeed exist. So Jung and his five archetypes, the persona, which is how we present ourselves. For instance, I'm a nurse, so when I go to work, I present myself in a specific way that I don't present myself here, because I have certain things, I have to be professional in certain different ways. And as much as if someone is a psychologist or a banker or teacher, you have your persona of a teacher. When you're home, you're not going to act like a teacher to your, well, maybe you might if you have kids, but not exactly. You're going to be a little bit more relaxed. You put your slippers on, drink your Starbucks coffee. Then we have the ego, which is the center of consciousness. It is identity. It is I. But it's not the totality of the psyche. It is like the doorman. He's careful not to let the guys in the unconscious mind come through, because he helps. Without the ego, we can become schizophrenic. Our mind can be completely lost. There's no filtration system. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The shadow, the ominous shadow. The shadow both contains the good and the bad that we repress. It could be things from past lives. It could be things from this life. But it's pushed down, and it's at the unconscious level. So it's not present in our mind. And sometimes it's not necessary for certain. For instance, perfect example. Do you remember when you learned your ABCs? Do you remember how you learned to write? The method in which you were taught? Maybe some of you do. But you just do it every day. You write, you read. You don't necessarily constantly have to bring back to your mind how you did it, unless you had some sort of problem in your brain, you had a stroke or something like that, then it's a different story. But there's no need for your brain to constantly bring that to consciousness. You just know how to do it already. You know how to walk. You know how to, when you're supposed to go to the bathroom, they're just things that you already know. So the shadow, a lot of people think of it as something so bad, because the word shadow sounds bad, but it's not. The shadow exists as part of the unconscious mind and is composed of repressed ideas, weaknesses, desires, instincts, and shortcomings, and also a lot of good things. The anima and animus. This is interesting. Each one of us has one of these. The anima is a feminine image in the male psyche. So Leo has the anima aspect of him. All of us have this male and female within us. And the animus is the male image in the female psyche. The anima animus represents the true self rather than the image we present to others, and serves as the primary source of communication with the collective unconscious. I'm rushing through this a little bit only because we reviewed this, but we just wanted to bring it again. The anima and animus, you can think of some models in society, people who have perfect balance of both when they're able to manage their feminine side and both their masculine side. Because ultimately, when we become pure spirits, all that which is in our unconscious level comes to consciousness, which also means that this anima and animus within us is balanced, and we're able to mediate that. Our ego lets it through, but this is way in the future. At the level that we're at, it's not possible for us to remember everything. So much so, a lot of people believe that when you die, all your past lives, boom, are going to come to your conscious mind. That's actually an erroneous belief. A lot of spiritists even believe that. It's an erroneous belief. You can find it in No Solar, also in the book Action and Reaction by Chico Xavier, the medium Chico Xavier by the spirit André Luiz. In the book Action and Reaction, there is a specific example where a regular spirit, I'd say he wasn't a troublemaker, he was there learning in a colony called Mansão Paz, Peace Mansion. And he comes to the mentor and he says, mentor, I have a question. I've been dead for a long time now, and I've been going to this school, I've been learning, I've been volunteering, I've been doing all these great things, but how come I don't have my memories of my past life yet? What's going on? So the mentor has to explain to him that it's not time for all of those unconscious memories to come to light. He wasn't ready for it. So it's something for us to think about. And then the self, a term that Joanna uses a lot throughout her text. A lot of these archetypes she used throughout not just this book, The Psychology of Gratitude, in another book called Personal Triumph would be in English. It's not in English. She also uses a lot of these terminologies. You can find it in Portuguese. For those of you who read Portuguese, you can find it online, usually to purchase, or sometimes a PDF. I don't know if everyone could see this in the back. This says the self, this archetype is defined as the unification of unconsciousness and consciousness. Jung calls this selfhood. The popular psychologist Abraham Maslow calls that self-actualization. Basically, according to Jung, it's like what I said earlier, that all that which exists in the unconscious mind comes to consciousness, and we are at peace with all of it. That's way in the future. Some other terms that sometimes people confuse that we wanted to bring to light is the term emotion and feeling. Let's dispel some of that. And we brought this definition before. We wanted to bring it again because Joanna talks throughout the book. She says emotion. She talks about feelings. And majority of the time on our slides, we put the source here. This particular definition does not come from Joanna, but it does match up. This is from the, you can find it online at the Library of Congress when the Decade of the Brain conference was going on. This is by Dr. Damasio. He defined emotion as a physiological response in our body that can be observed. And feelings are our conscious perception of all those changes happening in the body and the very subtle changes that are happening in the way our cognitive apparatus functions. What does that mean? Basically, okay, I can physiologically anger, the sadness, I have a physiological response. If I'm sad, I might cry. And then I say, I'm sad. I feel sad. That's basically what that is. I feel sad. In that sentence, you have a feeling and you have an emotion. I feel, which is describing the emotion that I'm physiologically feeling. Make sense? Cool. You guys good? I'm rushing through this first part because I really want to get to the deep stuff. In the beginning of chapter 2 of this book, Joanna talks about, she basically paints a picture. So when you start medical school, or nursing school for that matter, probably, well, I don't know. So let's just stick with medical school and nursing school because that's what I know. When you start those basic classes, you take an anatomy and physiology class. Before you start learning about, cancer and diseases and all that, before you learn any of that, you have to learn the anatomy and physiology of the body. Simple. It's the mechanics and how the body works. So when you know about a disease, you know how the body works. You're going to know how this disease is going to affect the different parts of the body. Joanna uses the same methodology in her writing. She brings first how things happen, the A and P of emotions, and then she brings the disease itself. So she says, this is how it happens. Throughout our successive incarnations, remember, when Aloisa was up here with Roger and Shayla and Dione, and Aloisa was over here, well, what happens back when Aloisa was a caveman or cave woman, you don't know, with all due respect. Back when he was a caveman, he didn't have his prefrontal cortex, his ability to reason yet. He, like the rest of humanity that was created, we have our basic instincts, which, as Aloisa is currently in the 21st century, don't serve him too well. Don't serve any of us too well, because those instincts must be transformed into something more purified, more refined, more sublimated is the terminology that Joanna likes to use. So she says the following: lower feelings are these perverse inheritance that we bring with us from our existence since back the time when we began to know of ourselves, that we existed, the sense of self. And they are responsible for resentment, anger, jealousy. all those lower feelings, okay? What happens? Well, all those lower feelings, right, which she's going to call those primitive emotions, she says we also have a primitive ego. Unlike today, our ego is much more refined than it was before, but some part of our ego is primitive still. We have a very base. I'll explain to you that in a second. So she says we have lower feelings, which are this perverse inheritance. Then we have a primitive ego, which capitulates to equally primitive emotions, which basically means it gives in to all those lower emotions. And remember, the ego is a doorman. So this doorman's like, sure, come on through. Well, you're letting all of those perverse lower level emotions like resentment, anger, jealousy come through. Well, what happens when they kind of get together and they're in cahoots, they're working together, primitive ego and primitive emotion, it's not good. And Joanna says one of the ways to overcome that as a 21st century being, for example, we see people that are quite intelligent, that are successful, but yet have many complexes, many problems with controlling their emotions. We had an experience recently with one of our bosses, we have many, and she said to me, Kirsten, and she's a very good person, she's very high-level intellectual, I guess you could say, she's very smart in a high position, but she confided into me, and I know she's never going to watch this, so she said to me, you know, I got into an argument with a very high official in our company, and she said, I was so angry, I could not contain myself. And I let it be very apparent how angry I was. And I said to her, well, the next time that happens, you have to try to use your rational brain, which, by the way, it's interesting, we've mentioned this here before, how the brain works, right? We have the amygdala, which is shooting all those emotions to our frontal cortex, the front part of our brain. But what happens is that there's a lot of pathways. Let's say there's a lot of highways from our emotional brain to our thinking brain, but there's not a whole lot of highways that go from our thinking brain, I should have had a picture here, to our emotional brain. What does that mean? Well, Aloyso, when he was here with all his personalities that existed before, so in his brain, not really, I'm just using him as an example, guys. This is not really who Aloyso is. He's a wonderful human being, by the way. He's a great artist. What happens is that he may have with him these urges to get really angry. And because the part of his brain, which Joanna calls this the reasoning part of our brain, isn't very, we would say, like a muscle that you don't use a lot, it's kind of weak. And she says we need to work that muscle of our reasoning. It's the only way to overcome this. So, as one of my bosses said, this primitive side of her, this instinct to want to slap that person in the face came through. Of course, she didn't do that, thank God, she'd have lost her job. But the desire was real, and she really wanted to do that. But she had at least common sense, although she was screaming at this person, to know, to use her reasoning, that that would not be wise. So Joanna says what happens is that all of this stuff, these lower feelings, this primitive ego, it trickles down to our individual unconscious. And if we don't use this directed reasoning, it'll come through. Well-directed reasoning. It'll come through, and then what happens? It's why we act crazy sometimes. In the most layman of terms, basically. It's the evolution of the spirit in its finest way to explain it. When the spiritual principle is evolving with the intelligent principle, we still have the remnants of our primitive selves. We have what they call the first brain, which is the lower part, the basic, the parts of the brain that is very basic, that controls, breathing, heart rate, all those things. Hindbrain. Thank you. The word wouldn't come to me. The hindbrain. So that we still have that. It's only in the recent, I don't even know how long we've had the prefrontal cortex. It hasn't always existed. But since through our evolution, that's the part of the reasoning that differentiates us from the animals. 10,000 years we've had the frontal cortex, give or take. No? where some other scientists here are saying no. But a little bit more, a little bit less, give or take a couple thousand years. We get the idea. We get the idea. So it's not been so long, guys. So give yourself a break. When you act a little crazy sometimes, give yourself a break. Joanna talks a lot about this. That's why we have a lot of complexes. Self-forgiveness. There are even things that we don't even realize we carry guilt. But there are certain complexes in the ways that we act. We allow ourselves to go through certain situations because of this deep-seated guilt from previous lives. But she says self-forgiveness. Stop. She actually says this in the book. Stop judging yourself. And stop judging other people. It's beautiful. It's really deep. But let us understand a little bit about this instinctual side, this primitive side of us that we bring with us. From the Spirit's book, question 75, Kardec asked the spirits, is it correct to say that the instinctive faculties decrease as the intellectual faculties increase? The spirits answer, no. Instinct always exists, but humans neglect it. Instinct can also lead to morality. It almost always guides us, sometimes more surely than reason. It never errs. I'm going to read the 75A, and then we're going to discuss this for a second here. Kardec makes a follow-up question. Doesn't he say? He says, why isn't reason always an infallible guide? Now, you would think that it would be, right? You would think that having a rational brain is rational. It makes sense. Yes, it is hot in here. So why you would think that? But the spirits say, it would be if it were not distorted by faulty education, pride, and selfishness. Instinct does not reason, whereas reason allows choice and endows humans with free will. Okay, sidebar to this. What they're saying here, when in doubt, trust your instinct over your reasoning. Why? Because what they said here, faulty education, we may misinterpret situations, but our instincts are so deep-rooted within us. Since the time of the animal kingdom, their instincts are what saved them. So if your instinct is to run, but your reason's like, well, run. When you were a beautiful gazelle, you were running. You weren't reasoning with the lion, say, well, maybe he wants to talk to me. Maybe he wants to be friends. When in doubt, follow your instinct. That's what the spirits are telling us here, which seems counterintuitive, but it's not. It actually makes sense. I'm going to read the observation that Kardec makes. I didn't put it up here, but I'm just going to read it. It's brief. He says, instinct is a rudimentary intelligence. Instinct is a rudimentary intelligence, differing from intelligence per se, in that its manifestations are almost always spontaneous, while those of intelligence are the results of thought and deliberate action. Instinct manifests in various ways according to the different species and their needs. In beings with consciousness, like us, and the perception of external things, it allies itself with intelligence, i.e., with will and freedom. And that's the other thing we have over the animals. We have freedom of choice. Independent of God's divine law, God allows us to choose. So when we see ourselves as the caterpillar on our way to create that chrysalis, on our way to become butterflies, how fast we become that butterfly is entirely up to us. That's what we learn in the Spirit's book. We can expedite our evolution, or we can, drag our feet. Or we can choose to learn. She's going to bring in, because you might be thinking, well, where's the gratitude in all of this? Let us go back to the image of Aloiso and all the people that he was. Aloiso, to be a psychologically mature person, we use Aloiso as someone to represent all of humanity. A metaphor, yes. Point for you, Roger. Now I lost my train of thought. So we use him to show us that he can take all that which he learns in his life. He can say, oh, poor me. I had a bad mother. My brother was always mean. I was poor all the time. Or he could say, man, I learned so much from that brother of mine that was mean. I really am so grateful. It seems funny, I know, but Joanna says that attitude is what qualifies us as a psychologically mature individual. And that attitude is what helps to expedite our process. Why? Because we are accepting. Once we begin to get upset at something that's happened to us, we create this complex within us. That hinders, she says, our illuminative process, our process to illumination. I did something here. Let's bring up both. Okay. Talking about psychologically mature, you guys weren't supposed to see this yet. Just pretend this is not here. When she talks about, as I just mentioned, the psychological maturity, she said when someone is psychologically mature, it awakens the conscience. 2, it's transcendental reality, meaning the self. It's transcendental reality that it is a millenary being destined for happiness. When I go through this process, when I accept all that which has happened to me, and basically, in modern day terms, look on the bright side, think about the positive, and be grateful for everything, the good and the bad. We talked about gratitude last month and its definition. I had asked you all to write down at that time your definition of gratitude. I didn't observe the answers. They're for your personal self-observation. We generally, as a whole, we know gratitude as, let's say, for instance, Gianni and Aloysia, can you please come to the stage? We're going to give a live presentation of modern-day gratitude. Aloysia, you just bought your wife a new iPhone. Give it to her.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Modern-day gratitude. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You can go sit down. Modern-day gratitude was what you just said, what you just saw. Someone gives something to you, you thank them, and you might even think, oh, I can't wait to give them something back. Oh, when it's Aloysia's birthday, I'm going to make him his favorite cake. What is it? June. It's in June for you guys to know. But Joanna says gratitude is much more than this, that which we just saw. It's much more profound. In fact, Joanna says gratitude is this. First, Aloysia, come, and Aloysia and Joanna, please come again to the stage. Yeah. Yes. Aloysia gives again the cell phone to her, and you say, I'm so grateful.
I'm so grateful.
And in this instant, true gratitude, Joanna says, you guys can step a little bit in front here, says that true gratitude is not in Giovanni waiting for his birthday to come and making him a cake, but it's her deep emotional gratitude that she has every day for him, to know that she appreciates just having someone in her life to present this to her. And a truly good person, he's not waiting for her to say thank you. He's doing it because the cell phone is a bad example because it's material, but he's doing it because she needs it. Her cell phone broke. Her job is, driving everywhere and there. So he knows that it's for her own benefit. Thank you. True gratitude never waits for a thank you. If we are giving with the either subconscious or unconscious, waiting for a thank you or recognition, it's not true gratitude. It's not. It's simply not. And when we are in that state of waiting for a thank you, we remain psychologically immature. This can happen in many different arenas of life. Sometimes I'm going to use certain archetypes, certain personas, and hope I don't offend anybody. But let's say, for instance, a husband and a wife. or any other two people that live together that love each other in a committed relationship. But let's just say, because it makes it easier for storytelling, that the wife continues to cook for her husband, clean for her husband, and he just comes home, he puts on his clean clothes, eats her good food, and goes about his business. She begins to be very angry over a period of time and is waiting for the thank you, waiting for that, wow, you really did a great, the spiffy job on my shirts this week, honey. And she's waiting and waiting. And women, we hold. And one day, boom, we explode. Not everybody, just some people do. That is not true gratitude. She's waiting for something and this is a very difficult concept for us as human beings because we are used to gratification, doing something and getting gratified for it. And in fact, our brains are hardwired for this, to do something and we get something back. Even it's a part of our survival. You do something, you like to eat, feedback mechanism, eating's good, I'm going to keep eating. But when we become psychologically mature, we transcend that base level mechanism. We cease to desire, thank you so much. That's so awesome. It's good. We are not saying that when you receive something, that there's no need to say thank you. You should say thank you. It's good to honor, to show gratitude. It's good for the person that's showing it because it means that when Gianni is saying thank you so much, it means that she also is a psychologically mature human being. But Eloisa should not, like the rest of humanity, we should not expect it. Joanna says, when one expresses love, the cerebral cortex promotes an organic feeling of well-being that amplifies the possibilities for development of the self, which then leads to health. So there is a physiological response, of course, we know this, that happens in our brain that releases these hormones that make us feel good. When a woman is breastfeeding her baby, these hormones are released throughout her body to make her feel good. In a way, God created us that way so we perpetuate the human species. But also, as our instinct evolves to sentiment, we are superseding that basic instinct. Does that make sense? We're going to do our first activity. All of you have a piece of paper in front of you, on a clipboard, as well as a mirror. We like to start off every activity now, holding that mirror to your face, because a lot of people don't know how to look at themselves in a mirror, something so basic, without thinking something negative immediately. Oh my gosh, look at my face. Oh, scary. I might break it. Let's stop thinking bad things about ourselves. Let us look in the mirror, and in your mind, don't say it out loud. Remind yourself, hey, you good-looking person, you're a child of God. I love you. Go ahead, Leo, do it. Camera's on you right now. Tell yourself that you love yourself. I love you. You're wonderful. Say that to yourself in your brain. I love you. You are awesome. Despite that sometimes you might be a little crazy sometimes and all those complexes might come through my ego. But I love myself because I'm a child of God. I'm ever growing. Okay, here comes our first activity. Joanna says that true happiness when we overcome a multitude of conflicts such as guilt, shame, judgmental behavior, transference, projection, and detachment. She says individuals must free themselves from self-judgment and judgments towards others by means of reconstructive work of the emotional tools. We could give a whole seminar on that paragraph alone. Stop judging yourself. Stop judging others. Instead, be grateful for all of your failures, for all of your misdeeds, knowing that it'll lead you to being a better person. Be grateful for all the heinous, horrific, or bad things somebody else has done to you, because that has made you stronger. It has not killed you, but it will make you stronger and has pushed you to be a deeper, more understanding, hopefully, human being. At least someday it will. So the activity is, how do you view yourself? How do you view others around you whom you are in contact with? How do you view yourself? Well, Kirsten, you don't have, this is not for you to say it out loud, it's for you to write down, but you could say, well, I view myself as a pretty patient person, but sometimes people get on my nerves, or I view myself as a good woman. I'm there for my family, or I view myself as a good student, or this or that. How do you view yourself? It's important to know what we think of ourselves, to see, to measure, to gauge where I'm at. When Joanna says that we need to overcome these conflicts, we have to know what lies beneath the surface. Many of us might already be doing this on a daily basis. We're in constant contact with ourselves, knowing our shortcomings, knowing that I'm impatient. So when I'm driving, I bring it to my conscious mind. Okay, Kirsten, I know that you get road rage. Okay, let's be conscientious here. If someone cuts you off, you bless them. Don't give them fingers. Bless them. Bless them with your whole hand and not just one finger. Bless them. So be aware of that which we are doing. So this is just one activity. We have another one after this. Give you a couple minutes to write this down. How do you view yourself? How do you view others around you whom you are in contact with? For those of you who are on the web, you can do this activity as well by writing down simply these answers. How do you view yourself? How do you view others around you whom you are in contact with? Give a minute, play a little music. Good and the bad. The good, bad, and the ugly. Just another minute and a half. Okay. Okay. Keep those answers. There's this famous story. It's more like a fable or a tale, where there's a man leaving a city. And in order to go from one city to the next city, he has to cross this long road. Let's say it's I-70. But this time there's no highway. It's a road. People have to actually walk it with their donkeys and horses and whatnot. This guy sets off walking. Halfway down the road, the halfway point between this city that he's leaving and the city that he wants to go to, he encounters an old woman. An old woman who's just hanging out on the side of the road on a chair. He approaches this old woman and says, oh, she must know something about this other city. He approaches the woman and says, excuse me, do you know anything about the city that isn't the next city over? And she says, yes, I do. Why do you ask? And he says, well, I would like to visit that city, but since you're here and you know about it, could you tell me about the city? She said, I sure can. But first, I want to ask you a question. He said, sure, ask away. She said to him, tell me about this city that you just left. He said, okay, it's a terrible city, and people are mean, and people steal, and nobody's nice to you, nobody smiles, so I'm tired of it. I want to go someplace better. And she said, well, I'm sorry to tell you that the next city, it's not much better. Even be worse. So he turns back around and just goes back to the city where he came from, disheartened. Some time passes, a few days. Another man, needing to go and move to another city, same situation. He goes and travels the same road, encounters the same old woman. This is a different person, though. He encounters this lady, and he says, excuse me, I'm leaving this town, wanting to go to the next. But before I go, I wanted to know someone who was from that town. Are you from there? She said, yes. And he said, could you tell me a little bit about that town? And she said, sure. But let me ask you a question. He says, okay. She says, tell me about the town you just left. And he said, oh, it's wonderful. People are great. People are nice. They smile. I'm just leaving because of my job. And she said, oh, okay. Well, that next town, it's wonderful, just like the one you're coming from. He said, great. He was happy. Went home, packed up, and moved. It's important to know that all the baggage we carry with us affects our perception. We brought the idea in the beginning of our talk today of Aloyso and all of his different past lives that he went through, because all of that creates a baggage, an emotional baggage, all the good, the bad, and the ugly. It stays with us. And all that we have experienced and all helps us, or not, view the world and the things around us a certain way. This story is to tell us and to show this particular thing. So it's important how our perception, how our lens is, because sometimes we need to correct our vision. Because it's not that the world outside of us is so bad, it's because we have so many complexes within us, our judgmental behavior, projections, shame, guilt, and many other emotions that are deep-seated within us. And we have to begin this work of reconstruction. Joanna says it's one that takes a tremendous amount of courage, but we have to want it to begin that process. One last activity. Joanna defines true gratitude being grateful for the good and bad that happens to us. That equals psychological maturity. So we pose this question: what bad things have happened to you? It could be something simple. It could be somebody cut you off or while driving. Do you feel they were beneficial and pivotal for your growth, or were they a waste of time? You don't have to write it down. You could just think about it, but sometimes writing it down makes it more concrete, helps us. Sometimes it's even cathartic to write things down, even to talk about them as well. It helps for us to gauge whether or not we are ebbing towards this psychological maturity. Am I viewing the things in my life that were bad? And we say bad because things really aren't bad. Everything is for our own personal growth. But how are we viewing those things? Do we truly think they were a waste of time? If so, we need to reevaluate those things that happened to us, because everything and nothing is by chance. Everything is for our own growth, to reach this plenitude, this fullness of self. For those of you who are on the web or watching the recorded version of this, you also can write this down. What bad things have happened to you? Do you feel they were beneficial and pivotal for your growth, or were they a waste of time? We'll give us just another minute or so. Okay. Some of the lessons in life when we talk about quote unquote bad things that have happened to us, Sometimes we might find ourselves doing something that's quite common as human beings, as conscious human beings, conscious thinkers. Is this thing we do sometimes? It's called complaining. Complain about our boss, complain about this, that, complain about the government, complain about everything around us. But Joanna says that we should refrain from complaining. But let us, as she does, she differentiates complaining with what she calls the recognition of the negativity that lies within each of us. This is the first step in unmasking our shadow. So it's different in complaining about your bad childhood to talking to a professional or someone that be able to work through these complexes. If you are sitting to talk to someone merely to complain with no desire whatsoever to overcome that situation, to surpass it, then by definition, you're complaining. Refrain from doing that. Instead, if you think that you went through a bad situation in your life, whatever it may be, and it is something that bothers you, then it's causing some sort of also a blockage. Anything that is within us that we know it bothers us, it's a block from us moving forward. So let us spend some time, whether with ourselves or with a professional, with a good friend who can help you work through. Sometimes, one another, we talk to each other. We have some sort of fraternal assistance. We say, hey, I really got to get this off my chest. I really want to just talk about this to sort of work it through my brain. Does this make sense to you? And your good friend will say, look, this is my perspective. Why don't you pray about it? Why don't you look at it from a different perspective? And you say, you know what? I never thought about that. And from there, you begin the process of reconstructing your understanding. Because unmasking the shadows, Joanna says, is what's going to help us to be liberated from this weight of our past. She talks a lot about shadows and gratitude in this book. And when she talks about the shadows, the negative aspects, she said, they should work us inwardly to overcome them by reducing their impact through edifying and healthy contributions. You might say, well, what healthy contributions? What does she talk about? How do I overcome my shadows through edifying contributions? Well, she tells us what they are. She gives us some hints. She says, optimism. Being an optimist is a therapeutic technique to overcoming the shadows within us. Melancholy, giving up on things, being pessimistic and saying, oh, nothing ever works. It's not going to work. That doesn't help. It hinders you. Be optimistic. She says specifically, confidence in your success, our success. She doesn't say spiritual success, emotional success, financial success. She just says success. So it encompasses everything. Confidence in your or our success. Solidarity. Who knows what solidarity is? It's a term that we don't often hear, but it is something we should practice. What is solidarity? Dum, 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 dum. Paula. Hold on.
Oneness, communion with others.
Oneness and communion with others. That which encompasses the law of society in the third part of the book of the Spirit's book, part 3. We talk about the law of society. We must live amongst one another. We see a lot of solidarity popping up after a lot of wars, after great calamities that happen. We see groups, pockets of people banding together to say, let's support each other. We see a lot of this in the cancer societies, women that go through difficult experiences. Support groups have this solidarity built into them. And she also says the following: in effort to keep your accomplishments into perspective without unjustifiable concerns. What does she mean here? She says, make an effort to keep your accomplishments into perspective without unjustifiable concerns. We believe she can mean, 1, talking about humility. 2, not worrying so much about what we're going to accomplish, if we're going to accomplish it. Be optimistic. Work towards your goals. Oftentimes we fear the shadows, this part of ourself where even we might not even be conscientious, but deep down we're scared to know what lies beneath the surface. We don't know what's there. It's not in our conscious mind. But she says, don't fear your shadows. There's both good and bad there. Already begin to rewire your thinking to tell yourself, do not be afraid of that aspect of yourself that lies within the unconscious. She says, many people, when faced with problems, instead of facing them head on, hides their head in the sand. But you can repress. But she says, with their constitutive afflictive charge, it will resurge in the first opportunity there is. Givaldo actually has this kind of a saying that he says sometimes, that as much as we try to run away from our problems, we might be in a circumstance, we decide to bail, to leave. He's like, you know what? I don't want to deal with it. I'm gone. He says, you can, free will. You're more than welcome to leave a situation. But that which we must learn will reappear in our lives in a different form, but it'll be there to teach us the same thing. So, and ultimately, we can't run from ourselves. In the beginning of our talk today, we talked about this. I mentioned the collective unconscious and how it plays into when we look at certain nations, why certain nations hate our nation, why these people keep reincarnating with this hatred and it's perpetuated. Some say it's obsession. It's spirit obsession. And we are sure there is a spiritual component in it. But Joanna, alongside modern day psychology, which we can find this on carljung.net, talking about the collective unconscious. I'm going to read you this little 2 excerpts, the following. Archetypes constitute the structure of the collective unconscious. They are psychic, innate dispositions to experience and represent basic human behavior and situations. Thus, mother-child relationship is governed by the mother archetype, father-child by the father archetype, so forth and so on. And that I have the source down below. But Jung also further clarifies and says the following. The collective unconscious appears to consist of mythological motifs or primordial images for which reason the myths of all nations are its real exponents. In fact, the whole of mythology could be taken as a sort of projection of the collective unconscious. We can therefore study the collective unconscious in 2 ways, either in mythology or in the analysis of the individual. This is so pertinent. This is so real in Spiritism that Joanna de Angelis, in this book, The Psychology of Gratitude, she starts out the book talking about this very thing, talking about mythology. She talks about, I believe it's Perseus. But she talks about this very thing, that how we study the collective unconscious through this mythology. Basically, in other words, we use these symbols, these stories to help us to understand the inner workings of mankind. And Joanna, alongside both of these 2 texts, also brings to us more understanding. It is a long text, but we're going to discuss this. The shadow occurs in the collective unconscious by means of what can be denominated as counteracting energies, which characterize terrorists and criminals. This is Joanna de Angelis saying this. The shadow occurs in the collective unconscious by means of what can be denominated as counteracting energies, which characterize terrorists and criminals in general, as well as good citizens. And she mentions everyone from Hitler to St. Augustine. The projected antipathy and animosity that are stereotypically maintained actually arise from deep within the individual, where those emotions have become allies. It is as if it were necessary to have an adversary, an enemy, for one to show one's true personality. The collective unconscious has registered the entire evolutionary process of the individual. What is so real, as we read 2 texts back, it matches so well with what Joanna is bringing to us. Let us digest this a little bit here. She basically is saying something we mentioned early on in our talk, that this collective unconscious, these people that are reincarnating in different nations, are bringing with them this collective unconscious. It's staying in their psyche. That's why a lot of these erroneous beliefs and ideas are perpetuated. And what's even more, without a lack of a better term to use, disturbing, but it's a part of how the inner workings of how we work, is that it's so ingrained deep within the individual that if they don't have an adversary, it's like they don't know who they are. I'll give you an example. Bodybuilder, Arnold Schwarzenegger. If he were to today become a quadriplegic, I'm sorry, I'm using the most common example. If he were today to become a quadriplegic and not be able to work out, he would lose more than likely the entirety of his personality. He wouldn't know what to do with himself. Bodybuilding is so ingrained in this man since he was very young, probably 17, 18 when he joined the army at that time, or some form of the army where he was from in Austria. And what's he like, 50, 60 now? We're talking about 40 plus years just in this life alone of that. And you take away something that is so ingrained in a human being, you're going to destroy that human being's psyche. He'd have to, if he were capable, because some people will just simply deteriorate and fall into depression. They won't know what to do with themselves. This is so pertinent because many people ask, they come here and say, well, where's God? Why isn't God taking these people that are terrorists and criminals? Why isn't he taking them away? Why isn't he, allowing a big bomb to take them all out? Or why isn't he doing something? Well, first of all, free will. God never interferes with our free will. There is an expiration date for evil. There is, that we know for sure. Goodness, there's no expiration date. But for evil to perpetuate, there is an expiration date. God allows us to go but so far, and then he says enough. But what's interesting is that if we were to think, although we know that we are not that evolved yet, but if we were to think like a higher mind, why these spirit mentors don't just take away something from these individuals, move them to a different place, when it is so ingrained within them that if they were to remove it, they'd have so many problems psychologically, they would not be able to move on in their life. I'll give you another more concrete example, which actually is not so concrete. When obsession happens, and we can read this in this book, Between Heaven and Earth, great example of a very deep obsession between a incarnate woman who is the second wife of this man and the discarnate woman who is the first wife. Well, the first wife, who's, I'm just going to say dead because it's easier, who's dead, she's looking at the incarnate wife and is very jealous. And at some point, the incarnate woman, who for a while, the dead woman or the disincarnate wasn't able to do anything to her because she wasn't at her vibratory level. Well, at some point, the incarnate woman becomes depressed and lowers her energy, so the discarnate begins to obsess her. So much so, in the book, they describe these prong-like projections from this hand of the spirit. It's ingrained in the cerebral cortex of this incarnate, that when the spirits came to assess the case, and Andrea Louise said, "Mentor, are you going to relieve this incarnate from this obsession? Look at her. Her energy is dwindling. If she continues on this way, she's going to die." And the mentor said, "Look, Andrea, if I remove this obsessor, she will die. Because I'm thinking of the word in Portuguese, I don't know why. The way how deep ingrained, let's say, these prongs are, it's sort of connected to her vital self, that if they remove it, it's like life support, she'll die." So instead, the mentor said, the only thing we can do, two things. Either try to convince the obsessor to remove herself willingly, or to talk to the incarnate to raise her vibration, change her mind, change her perspective, to slowly disconnect herself from that obsessor. This interchange can occur from incarnate to incarnate, discarnate to discarnate. That's why we have people that are in unhealthy relationships because they're so, they're in the same situation. So it's like second nature to them. That's why we say, wow, why are they always in this kind of mode? Well, here you have the reason why. They are stereotypically maintained. They actually arise from deep within the individual. So it's so ingrained within ourselves. So in one life alone, it's not enough to modify. Those type of people that have this type of issue require a lot of enlightenment. So there's two ways we learn. We learn through love or we learn through pain. In the book Action and Reaction, they say that second to the power of God, pain is one of the greatest tools to change us. Because what we don't do willingly, suffering will change us. You ask anyone who's been through a great suffering, who overcame it, prior to that, they were one person. After that, they're somebody else. The caterpillar and the butterfly. We can get there. But we are coming upon a well-known holiday called Thanksgiving. And what's interesting, we talk about collective unconscious. And if anyone here does even 10 minutes worth of research, you know that the Thanksgiving that exists today really is a derivative for a very distant Thanksgiving that never really existed. There's just sort of has trickled down. It has sort of, through this collective unconsciousness, we as Americans have stayed with this. It's just stayed within our culture. But if you look back, it wasn't quite what they told me when I was growing up, when I was like 5 and 6 and the Pilgrims got together and this. It wasn't quite like that. Let's be serious. That's not really how it happened. But let's be grateful. Let's be grateful that this holiday is an opportunity for us to stop, sit around those who we actually love and care about, and think about all the things we're grateful for. Because perhaps we don't do it during the year. At least there's one day out of the year that we are grateful for something. Even with all this information, we learn that gratitude for the good and the bad will lead us down a more fulfilling path than having ingratitude. We know that as we first showed the many potential parts of ourselves that lie within the unconscious self, the unconscious mind of us, that there's so much for us to work through. But Joanna says it's something beautiful, because we know that this process can truly lead us to true fulfillment if we wish for it to. So we see here and we look at many different archetypes that exist here in this picture. We have the sister archetype, the brother archetype, the father-mother archetype. And if you know anything about Charlie Brown and his story, he's kind of fatherly, that's in my opinion. And I forget her name, but she's also very motherly. And Lucy, she's very domineering like a mother. And then you have other archetypes here. But the beauty of humanity and society and the way that God created us is that he wants us to all work together. He says, or rather, Spiritism says, let us find the good. Instead of saying, oh my gosh, Lucy's so annoying, she's so domineering, I hate going to Thanksgiving with her every year. So you know what? Let me learn a little humility and patience through Lucy. This is a great opportunity for me to just appreciate having family. There are people who this year, even though Thanksgiving is not a holiday that they really celebrate, but this year they won't have anyone to sit down at a table with. And they will never have anyone to sit down at a table with. Or maybe their situation is that they don't even have any food. But let us ask ourselves, what are you grateful for? What are you grateful for? If you only are thinking of all the good things in your life, re-examine all the bad things and begin to start this process of being grateful for the negative things in your lives that have happened to you. Because that will give way to forgiveness if you haven't forgiven those who've done things bad to you. Because if you're grateful for them, you say, no, I forgive you. I'm grateful for this experience. But sometimes it takes time. When we're ready, we will get there. When we desire to be there, we will be there. We end on this note. Gratitude. Not just one day a year. Please, let us begin to work on gratitude for everything, every day of our lives. Waking up and be grateful that we woke up in our physical body still. Having the opportunity to learn more. So I don't know. So let us put on the soft music. We're going to do a short visualization. Oh, actually, no. I don't think we have time for questions because it's kind of late. But we can do it later. We can talk later, you guys. But let us put on some soft music. Oh, it doesn't work later? Really? You sure? Okay. Questions, anyone? No? Okay. Yes.
It will be short. No. No, thank you. Close to my mouth. Thank you. No, thank you. It was very clear and helpful, and people will definitely get something to work on. I just wanted to share my thoughts on optimism, and this is coming from my own life. I now want to practice grounded optimism. For too many years, I always said everything was okay. I failed to discern when others, maybe unconsciously, were taking advantage. I failed to speak up for myself and say what I feel, what I need. So that's been a long journey. So I'm optimistically oriented, but I worry, especially with women, I tend to generalize, when they're not taking care of themselves because they continue to say everything's okay.
Yes, that's so good, Paula, because we shouldn't be in this unrealistic world where say everything is A-okay. We also don't want to be on the other end of that spectrum. We want to, it's not bad, as we say, it's bad to complain, but it's good to acknowledge the negative that exists both within us and outwardly and externally for us to differentiate, to categorize, to know where we're going. If you don't acknowledge something, you go for anything. So it's okay to say, look, this isn't good. So you know that doesn't work with me, or not being taken advantage of. It's important, and we shouldn't just be this, peace and love, make love not war type thing, and we're not really using our rational brain. Joanna says we must have both, balance of both, a rational and emotional self. We can't be too much of either. So thank you, Paul. That's good. Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you, Kirsten. I think it was a lovely talk, and several reminders for, took some great notes here. I like the passage or the slide that you brought about the psychological maturity ending to the happiness. And if there is, it's so true that we cannot get to this happiness, which is what God wants for all of us, before we get into this maturity, which reminds me a lot of responsibility. Responsibility for where we are, for what we are, for our actions now. And at the end, we can either stay stuck on that idea of, it's somebody else's fault, or me taking responsibility, accepting where we are and who I am right now, and say, look, I'm just going to be happy. And in this process, think that God wants me to be happy, and I think when we accept this happiness coming from up high, not what we think what happiness is here in this world, but what we can be in the future, it kind of liberates us so much. But it always, and this is something that I personally will say it, one of the things that I wrote down, this idea of responsibility, and it's not easy because we always want to find the excuse, the same way we find excuse for many things that we have to do in our daily lives, exercising, actually, you mentioned, nobody can do it for you. You have to do it yourself. You have to, say, look, I'm going to find time to exercise, to work, to go to work and divide yourself into these multiple beings sometimes, because time is so little, and take responsibility. So I love this connection that she makes of the happiness. To get to this happiness, we have to, let ourselves spark into this idea of maturity, the psychological maturity, before we can get anywhere. So I think it's a beautiful thing. And when you mention about also our need to have somebody else so we can dwell, it's so true that we see nowadays many beings, ourselves sometimes, most of the time also when we truly analyze ourselves, that there are certain things that if we don't have in our lives, we either find another problem to dwell with it, or we just become very lonely, we become very depressed. We need that in a way, instigative, exactly, crutch. So very well said. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so true. That's why people who have problems with addiction of all sorts, when they tend to leave one addiction, they leave it for another one sometimes. That's why it's good for them to be interacted with something that's positive, that's positively addicting, if you will. So we have to acknowledge our weaknesses, as Paula was saying, not to be optimistic and not think about all our negative selves, but also recognize it's something so beautiful. It's not something for us to be sad about, like, oh gosh, I have all these bad things inside of me, but to look forward to the beautiful butterfly without sounding really corny, but to the potential of what I could be is immense to what I am right now. What I am right now is not what I will be forever. It's just a temporary state. So thank you for your comments. And somebody? No? Okay. All right, guys. Thank you so much for your comments. Let us pass to our visualization and our passive session as well.